All right, so we do have Heath Renfrow, Stan Banash, Pamela Hepp, and Scott Raymond. So if you want to start, Heath, and give a little introduction, we can go from there.
Well, good morning, everybody. I came from Central Texas to come out here, so it took a little bit of a hike. I am with Leo Cybersecurity now, but I used to be the CISO for Army Medicine, a global-wide healthcare organization. I left there a couple months ago. Many reasons behind that. I was recently named EC Council's Global CISO of the Year, so that was because of Army Medicine, because of my team. So 1,200 personnel at Army Medicine, 48 hospitals, over 600 clinics, research facilities at Fort Detrick across the globe in different locations, where Kenya and other places. So large organizations. The reason I'm here is I've worked with Cherie before on some boards, and I'm looking forward to talking about our topics today.
Stan Banash. Stan Banash, Chief Information Security Officer for CHOC Children's, Orange County. For those that don't know us, we're a 300-bed facility, roughly 300 beds, with a population health, big population health group in Orange County. I've been with the organization for about 2 years now, and this is actually my first foray into healthcare. So it's been quite enlightening. I know a lot of people have come up through the ranks, and I've been in a lot of verticals. Most of them have been highly regulated government verticals. So financials, education, things of that nature. And so this is not my first rodeo with all the regulations, but I will tell you, I am kind of surprised at the state of affairs in healthcare in general compared to other verticals, right? And it's not a good surprise.
Hi, I'm Scott Raymond. I'm the Executive Director of Strategic Innovation and Technology for the Health System. I've been with MemorialCare for a little over 18 years. Started out as a clinician, so peds ICU nurse. So I was one of your problems, Stan, because I would work around technology, so that's kind of how I got to technology. I also had the pleasure of being the Director of Physician Informatics, so I put Epic in 6 hospitals from a physician perspective, so all their training, all their go-live support, and all the support ongoing. Fell into IT through that, so got in with our Epic team, and then I didn't really want to do IT because I don't like these guys, but just kidding, Stan. And so now my role has kind of changed. I was one of the CIOs of one of the hospitals, and so now my role is more broadly corporate, and I think they don't like me anymore because my boss put me in charge of cybersecurity, so I figure that he needed someone to fire if something happens, so that's kind of where I think I sit. But really, I liked Matt's presentation because he kind of hit on what I'm trying to do with security, and our posture is to secure the access, but not kill the access. So it's a balance between allowing the clinicians to access the systems they need to do their job, but also make that secure so I don't get fired. So thank you for having me.
Hi, my name's Pam Hep. I'm an attorney with Buchanan, Ingersoll, and Rooney, and I actually came from Pittsburgh, so I get the travel award, I think. I have been practicing in healthcare my entire career. My practice includes transaction as well as regulatory, and the regulatory aspect runs the gamut from Stark anti-kickback, but obviously HIPAA. I was part of our HIPAA task force when HIPAA was enacted. I'm a member of our data security team. I don't believe there's a day that goes by that I do not do something that relates to HIPAA or data security. Stan's presentation looks very much like presentations that I give. We see horror stories, from all of our clients. We're on a number of insurance panels as well, so we see the horror stories with respect to breaches. And what Stan spoke about is exactly what we're seeing and is consistent with the OCR investigations that are occurring as well. And so I'm here, I think, to add a little bit of sort of the legal perspective to this discussion.
Wonderful, thank you all very much. So really what we want to focus on around this is the medical devices and their impact for today's CISOs and the security environment as a whole. And look at how, with the devices coming in, what has to be done to protect from unknown threats that are just finding out, like medicine pumps. And so when you're taking that into account, when you're looking at all these new systems that you're bringing in that may not have been vetted out in a heavily secured environment, what's your stance towards those new devices as they're coming out? Heath, you want to take this one?
An open question. So I've been fighting the medical device community for a number of years, mainly because I was wearing a DoD hat during that time frame. And DoD has some pretty strict guidelines when it comes to IT, which, okay, it's a different type of IT with medical devices, but it has to be accredited underneath the risk management framework. So we were fighting these medical device vendors right and left. What we came down to was contractually we put into our contract and worked with legal that medical device vendors had to come in and provide at least a copy of their device to us ahead of time. We actually got permission through the medical device to be able to run scans. Okay, yeah, to make it, not a production environment, completely a test lab environment. We're not trying to risk the integrity of the device being broken. So these devices would come in, be scanned, and then we would go back to the vendors. And I mean, I'll give you a lab environment. Roche Labs, for example, had over 350 critical vulnerabilities found within its infrastructure. And its excuse to us was there was a firewall that they had in front of it. Their own built. The firewall was outdated by 2 years. It was obsolete. It was no longer any good. And we got past the firewall in seconds. So many different ways you can approach medical devices. The way we did contractually, we put in there in our RFPs, we had them understand they had to be secured to the risk management framework underneath this. So it means no critical vulnerabilities were allowed in their devices. Did we lose potential clients? You know, did we lose medical devices because of that? Yes. We had a lot of vendors walk away from us, but we had a lot of vendors step up to the plate. One thing I was working on when I left there was to be able to start sharing that information with the outside community of what devices were accredited against the risk management framework. And we did a lot of work. We had over 400 medical devices that are accredited. But inside my environment was over 630,000 individual medical devices. So we were just getting started. We grouped them together, about 40,000 different groups of medical devices. So nothing came into our environment without pre-scanning to be done with it. But that's a coordination effort. You can't break the FDA certification. So you have to coordinate that with the vendor. They have to give you permission. You really have no control when it comes to your medical devices. They own it even after you buy it.
Yeah, I think our stance is, and I think probably the other healthcare systems will agree, is we're just now trying to get our hands around biomed and all the devices because historically or typically that doesn't report up into IS at all. Usually it's to facilities, which is kind of silly because everything now is on the internet or connected in some way. So we're now just playing catch up. So we have the same kind of situation. Net new things, we get involved and test them, and we decided we would own the connection. So no longer can they set up B2Bs without going through IT, and we set up those connections. The other thing we started to do is we're walling off those devices on a separate VLAN and a separate firewall just so we can even control it more. But we're still catching up to find stuff that's been in use for years, right? There's pumps and other things that have been used. So we're trying to gather that information and doing a very big assessment. But the problem is we have 5 hospitals, we have 4 different biomed departments, and trying to gather all that information. It goes all the way down into the contracts and what the contracts say. Because if you're looking at a CT scanner or an MRI machine, those are phoning home as well. And they have a lot of information on them that you wouldn't think they would. So I think IT now is catching up. But you know, my vision is to treat it like any other end device or end node in the environment. So make sure that they're patched, make sure that the OS is up to date or encrypted or walled off. They have the code is up to date, and then just look at it, and the access, look at it just the same as you would look at access from the outside. So kind of fencing those things off. But I think we have a lot to do there.
Yeah, I would agree. Honestly, I wish we had the clout you have, right? Because we're small. It's a single hospital. It's small, right? And so the vendor response we get is a lot less cooperative because we're buying 1 device, 2 devices. We're not buying 100 or 1,000. But we have essentially the same problem. And I would add to that the continuation of devices. So we have devices that have been used for years within the environment, and they like a specific vendor, and they want a specific model or model series. And when the device dies for whatever reason and it needs to be replaced, of course, we want to apply the latest security standards to it. And the organization struggles with understanding that. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been told, well, it's been in operation like this for the last 12 years. Why does it need a password? Well, 12 years ago, maybe it didn't, but now it does. Things have changed, the times have changed, right? But it's difficult going back to the vendors often to do this. And we have started relying on other organizations who are producing databases, like NHISAC has one now you can participate in, where they will tell you how secure the devices are that you're using, right? So it's beneficial when we have the opportunity. Of course, we do bring the devices in, we throw them in a test lab. We've even dismantled them physically to see what a patient can get to in the device, right? And again, that's all with the vendors. We're at the mercy of the vendor for that, right? But you just don't know at this point, right? And it's difficult to get a grasp on the risk that you're introducing into the environment, right? We've had the segmentation, right? Siemens, it's a big company, and they just told us, oh, you have to use a Siemens firewall, you have to segment it. But nowadays, every device you have that's on the network is on the network because it needs to share its data with something else. It's sharing it with your EHR. Hopefully it has a HL7 interface, maybe it doesn't, right? But it's sharing it with something. And so the days where we could create a VLAN or physically segment, like Siemens, they want to physically segment their networks, right? The days you could do that, those days are pretty much gone, right? It's got to talk to everything, and as soon as you start punching holes into your network or adding ACLs or providing routes outside of that segmentation, you're opening it up to risk. You know, so it's not an easy problem to solve.
That kind of transitions nicely into an aspect, and this one's for you, Pam, more so. When you're looking at how consistently healthcare organizations are buying up other groups and merging and coming together, with these purchases that are going down, how are you looking at each individual security stance and how they're coming together? Is that something that, with your security background, is something that is addressed in the beginning stages, or how's that handled?
I'm going to give a legal, typical attorney answer, it depends. With a larger health system or hospital deal, we do see and typically have pretty robust due diligence checklists that include the IT landscape. And that has been the case for many years, although it continues to get more robust. When it's physician practice acquisitions, that's where I really see the vulnerabilities, because when those either physician practice acquisitions or the smaller ancillary service lines, those are typically deals that are done very quickly. They try to get them onboarded very quickly, and oftentimes IT is not included in those discussions, or if they are, it's either at the very last minute or even after the fact. And so they don't have the ability to go in and do the risk assessments to determine either penetration testing or to even know what the inventory is. I mean, I think a big struggle that I see with my clients is for the IT department to even know what the inventory is once these physician acquisitions have occurred, or some of these ancillary service line acquisitions have occurred. Let alone, then if they don't know that it's there, they can't do the testing, they can't do the risk assessments. So I think that's a real struggle.
Have you ever seen a situation where there was a weak security posture by one of the parties that ended the deal right then and there?
I can't say that I have seen that. We have seen a situation where it was a hospital deal. This was in the news. It wasn't one of my clients, but it was a hospital deal. It closed, and after the fact, it was determined that the FBI had been investigating the seller and had identified a security issue. I don't recall how the indemnification language was written into the purchase agreement, but that was a huge after the fact discovery for that hospital or that health system that they had just taken on a huge security issue. I haven't seen a security issue waylay a deal. At this point, it's usually other types of regulatory issues that come up that, if it's a regulatory concern.
Thank you. So as we're looking at kind of, the organization as a whole, how, and I'll leave this one open to who wants to jump onto it, how do we make sure that everyone from top management down is, to each individual employee, even contractors and auxiliary members, to understand that they are part of the entire issue and the solution as a whole, and each one of them has an integral piece to play?
Yeah, so that's a pretty open question. I think education, Matt hit on it, I think Stan hit on it. So educating your end users, and that starts with your C-suite. And so we've been able to, because our CIO has been with the organization for a long time and the CEO has been there for a long time, there's a very good collaboration there. And our CEO is just as concerned about cybersecurity as the CIO, which is great. But we've been educating everybody, like we fish ourselves, we do the education. Anybody that clicks on something has to go through a formal education. That's in our training system and it's logged. If you do it again, you go talk to your manager. If you do it again, you go talk to HR. So we're trying to build that in so everybody's aware. We put in some of the Microsoft tools where if they feel if some email's coming across, they just hit a button in Outlook and it goes right to our security team, which we can assess it. That's been very successful. So we're getting so much clicking. It's like, no, that was sent to you by your manager. It's okay to respond to that. So some of that is overload, but I think education is the only way to do it. I think Stan said it best, you can educate. You're never going to stop that, and it's always going to be an uphill battle, but I mean, that's all you can do. We have, 5 hospitals, north of 300 locations now and 15,000 employees. There's just that much work to do and that much education to do, and everybody has to feel that they're involved in security. And having that button in there has been kind of fun because they're really excited about, I think I found something, and they're sending it. So it's but I think that's the only way you can do it.
I can give an example of what we did at Army Medicine. So when I took over, we had really no program for education across the board. It did have to go to the C-suite. My level was a 3-star general. Okay, 3-star general memo went out saying cyber awareness training is #1 priority in this command. It's not just going to be an annual thing. It's going to be more often than that. We ended up going bi-monthly. And from there, I broke it into 4 different sectors. I had an executive level type training that was put together by University of Texas in San Antonio. It's a quick 6-hour program for senior executives when they came into the organization to understand what cybersecurity was and truly embed it down to their troops, because you're spread across the board. And then you had your general awareness training for your everyday users, and then clinical. I actually had a course developed that spoke to the clinicians in a way they would understand cyber awareness. It spoke on their level. And then I went to another level. We would sit there and put in a plan for family and at home. We put training in place for those folks to be able to have access to those resources with their family, the kids, the children, the wives. There's many reasons behind that. I had a lot more things to worry about being on DoD side. I had the attack vector into my organization could come through a family member and my insider threats being threatened, information being leaked through OPM and everything else like that. All our information, if you've been on DoD, we're out there. Somebody's got the information. So my attack vectors into my organization from literally insiders was that home risk was pretty big for us. We sit there and really focused on that, because if a child is getting blackmailed or a wife is getting blackmailed, it can come down to my insider threat saying, okay, I need you to give me access to this information inside. So it was a pretty robust program. We really show it. We really push phishing. You hit on phishing in your last thing. Even 1% means you're still vulnerable, but we do pretty robust. We use KnowBe4 for phishing campaigns. They're pretty robust when it comes through there. It does the little tricks that FireEye does, and as much as you can, it does come down to awareness and training, though. And it's difficult. Every attack vector, it's going to come through somebody, your insider. That's just the way it is.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with both of you. The training is great. We, in the past 2 years over at CHOC, have gone through a culture shift. When I got there, believe it or not, people did not believe that security was part of their job, right? I had physicians tell me flat out, right, that you're killing kids, right? Which is always an interesting argument. But it's you got to get the culture to accept that irrespective of what their job is at the organization, they're responsible for keeping it secure, right? Everybody leaves their house and they lock their door. It doesn't matter if your job is to lock the door or not, you do it. And that's what we're asking people to do, right? To be aware of that and to act appropriately.
I think it goes back to the slide that Stan had up that demonstrated where the attack vectors are on the inside, and it includes all levels of the organization from the C-suite to the clinicians, and the training has to be focused on all of them, because I think a lot of them, when you see the issues that happen that are internally related, sometimes it is people behaving badly, but most times it's people either not knowing what they're supposed to be doing or being negligent. And the more you educate and the more you remind, sometimes it's a reminder because they forget, but sometimes it's oh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't understand the implications. A good example is password sharing, and we can tell folks never to share passwords. And that's all fine and good, but you know what? I'm going to give my password to my administrative assistant because I need help, and it's easy for them. Well, we actually had a client breach where the person, it was a stolen hard drive out of a physician practice office over the weekend. All evidence was leading to this one person as the culprit because they were the last one to access. When in fact, her administrative assistant, they were able to determine from the swipe cards, is the one who went into the building over the weekend and stole the hard drive. She had given her administrative assistant her credentials. So that's a perfect example of why you might think you know your administrative assistant, but you don't know. And so those types of real life examples, I think, strike home when you do these educational sessions of why it's important for everybody at all levels of the organization to be diligent and vigilant with respect to security, and including the C-suite. I mean, a lot of the breaches, you hear CEOs making very stupid statements because they don't realize the implications of what they're saying. So and the buy-in has to start at the top.
Just to look a little bit more to the future, we're seeing a lot of changes in consumerism with being able to use Siri and Alexa and quickly interact with voices, as well as things like cryptocurrency that are being used as ransoming people here and there. And there's just all these different ideas going around with blockchain. And I'm sorry I mixed up the question a little bit as I was asking it. Forgive me there. But in the blockchain, all these different aspects coming through. How are you looking at the future of security when some of these consumer needs and desires are going to start coming to play? Do you see that as an issue or something that could be tackled?
I think it's going to be hard. I know our friends at Cedars, they decided to take Apple data and pull that in and see what they want to do with it. The problem with consumer devices from a clinical perspective, and the physicians, and if there's physicians in the room, they'll tell you this. If you give me a whole bunch of data without context, it really doesn't do me any good. So if you give me your Apple Watch or your Fitbit information and you send me hours and hours of, technically heart rate or EKG, unless I know the context of how that happened, or if I can't rule out the aberrant because it got water underneath the sensor or whatever, you really can't do anything with that data. So I think for clinicians and hospitals, if those devices are FDA certified and the parameters around how they're collecting the data and the data is analyzed properly, it'll be very important, but just sending random consumer data to a data warehouse is just going to languish and no one's going to do anything with it because it's just not valuable without the actual context. So I think you'll see a narrowing of those devices and a certification, and then someone has to look at the data and actually has to make a decision on it. And you know, a clinician will tell you without context, I don't know if you had a heart attack or your kid just picked up your watch. I don't know what happens. So I think
You kind of made a good point. Just out of when you said a device being FDA approved, if you're looking at FDA approved compared to HIPAA, what is there a HIPAA aspect to FDA approved, or are they something that's completely separate thoughts?
The FDA does not grant HIPAA certification, if you will. And FDA has guidance with respect to cybersecurity, but it does not have requirements with respect to cybersecurity. And at the end of the day, FDA's focus is patient safety, efficacy as well as patient safety. And so if there's a cyber issue, FDA's concern is, well, was it a cyber issue that impacted patient safety as opposed to a cyber issue that may not have had a patient impact? And so the FDA certification really is a totally different, it's an apples and oranges conversation, really.
But in a way, kind of, if these medical devices, which are controlling insulin, pain control, release situations like that, where it actually does have a possibility to impact someone's life, could that something that maybe we'll see in the future, the legislation or change?
I don't see, if you're asking if HIPAA is going to change.
Or like, no, if when they're moving kind of going back to FDA, are they going to, legislation kind of move forward to FDA and HIPAA coming together and working towards a more comprehensive model?
I don't see that happening, no.
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 I think the FDA is more concerned that the safety of that device. So if you look at the pre and post implementation regulations from FDA on medical devices, there's certain aspects of how you build that device, how you secure the OS, secure the code, and to make that a safe device. And I think that where a lot of these device companies fall down is the second part of the post implementation. If you read the regulation, is you're supposed to do continuous monitoring on those systems, and you're supposed to give feedback to your customers that you've either found a vulnerability or this is a recommendation, all the way to you should take this out of service. I think if you look at the WannaCry and the Siemens thing, that obviously is not happening, right? So I think that's a place where healthcare as a collaborative can push these folks to do that, because once they get it certified, they kind of hide behind the FDA and say, well, I don't want to mess with my FDA regulation, so I can't change the XP with Siemens and their servers run in 2003. They're like, we're not changing it because we're going to break FDA. Well, the FDA came out and said, no, that's not true. You need to make sure that your device is secure as long as it's being used. And I think that's going to be a shift for a lot of these companies.
Yeah, and FDA looks at the manufacturer, not at the healthcare provider either. So they're looking at it from a different perspective. And from the FDA's standpoint, we're going to make sure as the manufacturer develops it, that it meets certain standards. But once it's put into use at a healthcare provider, they're kind of hands off other than for the reporting with respect to adverse events and that sort of thing.
Just because we're coming up on time here, just to wrap up, if you guys had maybe one final message to leave everyone with before we wrap this up, what would it be? And since we started with you that time, Heath, we'll start with you, Pam.
I think my final message would be, you guys have a very difficult job. As I think Stan had mentioned, you are working your job, but while the bad guys out there are working a job to attack you. And so at the end of the day, you can only act reasonably. From a regulatory perspective, the standard is a reasonableness standard. You have to remain vigilant. You have to have the policies and procedures in place, the processes in place. If you don't monitor and make sure that they're working, if you don't monitor and make sure that you're following your policies, if you're not doing the risk assessments and vulnerability testing, you're going to have a problem. But you need to actually implement and do what you say you're going to do, or the policies are worthless. And training is a huge part of that. The educational aspect is a huge part of that. And communication at the end of the day, I think, is kind of what brings all of this full circle in terms of making sure that you're communicating within the organization to know what devices are out there, what inventory is out there, because that's a huge struggle for this group, is to the inventory management, whether it's medical device or other third-party software.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do with my organization is come up with a standard best practice for healthcare security. And I think, you know, as good of a job as I can do, I can't do the best job unless I collaborate. So collaborating with other health systems and coming up, and, you know, some of the forums that are out, I think are very helpful to that. But we need, as an industry, to come up with a standard, because we have a unique situation. We're not like banking. We have to take care of patients. You have clinicians who need access, so that balance. But, you know, if we can work together and come up with that standard, because without a standard, I mean, Lean will tell you, if you don't have a standard process, you're not going to ever get anywhere. So I think these forums are fantastic. I think any of the collaborations we can do and come up with that standard will be helpful. And I'm trying to work towards that in my organization. I kind of see my job as a frozen lake inspector, looking for cracks. And if I find too big of a crack and I don't do something about it and I fall through, well, that's me getting fired. So I think that amount of diligence, to your point, is you have to just keep constantly looking, because it'll be a little tiny fissure that could open up, and that would be it. So, but I think these things are great. I think talking to our peers and sharing that information, because we really don't compete for the most part, unless you're a hospital that remains nameless. It's right next to my hospital that I compete against, but I'll collaborate with anybody. But no, I'm just kidding.
It's kids, man. It's kids. So think about this, right? At CHOC, we've got twice as many medical devices that are wired as we do endpoints. What are the security controls you put on your endpoints? You're encrypting them. You've got anti-malware, right? You've got other controls in place. The majority of those controls cannot be put on a medical device. So where's your real risk here? If you're not dealing with those medical devices, you think you're doing your job, but I'm telling you, you're not. Right? You really need to look at them. They're a huge attack surface.
I'll borrow that. I might have taken away from me. Somebody didn't want me to talk anymore. Yeah. So two things I'll end this on is, if you're a cybersecurity professional in the room, go meet your business partners, put your feet up on their desk, and sit there and make a relationship with them so they understand you a little better. I'm a Texan. I normally have cowboy boots on, and I'm literally walked into Washington, D.C. to go meet all my business peers and put my boots up on their desk and said, all right, let's talk. And let me understand you and you understand me. And it really will help overall your entire organization, because if they can just understand what you're trying to accomplish and you can understand what they're trying to accomplish, you're going to find that medium ground. Remember, cybersecurity is not here to impede the business process. We're here to complement it. And we're too much viewed as the folks that impede things. Number two is, we didn't discuss this topic, but I think it's a huge topic within your infrastructures. Pay attention to your facility control devices, your ICS, your SCADA systems, your HVAC systems. It's extremely important to have an inventory on that and be able to understand the management, B2B connections, third-party vendors getting in. It was a huge nightmare during my job. Most of my gray hair came from that industry. So those are my two things. And
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panel for coming and sharing their insights.